Show your support. Subscribe to the podcast. Hello, I am That British Guy and welcome back to NXT Talk, my podcast where we discuss all things NXT. Now, last week I had to do kind of an earlier episode because I was going away, so it didn't take into account anything that happened last week. It also didn't take into account everything that we found on social media that morning with regard to the Ciampa and Black NXT title match. So, firstly, thanks everyone for bloody leaking that, including, I think, WWE themselves. It seemed the whole world knew about that. So, cheers for that. Brilliant. It was just like everything that had happened with the Moustache Mountain and Royal Albert Hall and everything, where they tell you what happened before you get a chance to see the damn thing. Cool. But like those matches, even though I knew the outcome, what a hell of a showing this time by Ciampa and Black. Was a brilliant match. They were given close to half an hour and yeah, they were able to just get in there and get on with the job at hand and did a hell of a good job with it. So let's jump straight into that. We might as well start at the very end of the show with all things to do with Black and Ciampa. At the very beginning, we got a video package kind of showing their victories at the last takeover and then their little kind of altercations with each other on NXT tapings the last couple of weeks, where Ciampa kind of calls out Black in the ring and sort of puts himself in the title picture. And sort of claims that he only needs one opportunity and he will walk away with the gold. And then the other week he attacks Aleister Black backstage as he is on his way to kind of address the NXT crowd. So he's kind of got the one up on him. And that was after Black kind of had a brief one-to-one chat with Gargano saying, look, whatever you do, he cannot win that title off you. Do whatever it takes to make sure you hold on to that. And Black kind of asserting himself and saying, look, he's my problem now. You had your kind of issues with him. That's been put to bed. Let me deal with my own stuff on my own. Don't get involved. Don't have anything to do with him and me. This is my issue now, so kind of stay out of it and let me do my thing. And that's obviously when Ciampa jumps Black and hits him with that kind of draping spike DDT, this time off of a table, similar to what he hit Gargano with at TakeOver when Gargano was kind of draped over the ropes. So the match itself was very back and forth, but in kind of very sensible chunks. Again, starting off with kind of early, fast-paced, frenetic chain wrestling with kind of targeting on the legs and the head and getting sort of quick roll-up pins in to kind of surprise the opponent. I said a couple of weeks ago that this seems to be fairly commonplace in NXT, and I think that the main roster have kind of got this style confused with rest hold that we seem to see on a fairly regular basis at the beginning of quite a lot of their high profile matches, thinking that they are doing sort of fast paced, frenetic chain wrestling where each guy is trying to get one up on the other person in the early stages of the match, and they're kind of countering each other and turning that into other holds, things like that. But instead of it actually coming across like that, they're just literally taking a rest in the middle of the ring for about 5 or 10 minutes. So we saw that again here, and after kind of a quick out of the ring striking sequences from Black, Ciampa is able to kind of get the first main advantage when they get back into the ring. and it really kind of takes Black using his striking abilities to get back on top of the match. And as he's doing that, Ciampa again dumps him outside the ring and slams him into the barricade and the apron and the steps to kind of use any underhanded, kind of cheap, borderline cheating kind of techniques in order to get the upper hand back again. And that is when he starts working on Black's back, backbreakers, and kind of a cloverleaf hold as well on the back to kind of take, as they explained it, take the core out so that he's not able to hit the Black mass. We find out later that that's not necessarily the case, but for the time being it kind of slows Black down. There are a few times when he tries to do lifts on Ciampa and is kind of hampered because of the damage done to his back, but he uses Ciampa's kind of weakened knee as an opportunity to get himself back into the match. So it very much at this point of one guy getting 2, 3, 4 minutes of really strong offense and kind of just leaving the door slightly open for your opponent, and that opponent exploits that and works their way back into the match. After Ciampa kind of goes down, there's kind of more back and forth pins, which leads into a double down, and Black kind of gets the upper hand on this with a brilliant sequence of a kick to Ciampa which kind of staggers him, and then a Meteora off of the top rope, and then another kick to leave Ciampa dizzy, and then a brilliant kind of almost deadlift German suplex pin, which is kind of the closest we get to Black winning at this point. And then after this it kind of leads into the main ending of the match. There is a cameraman near the ramp area which he kind of gets knocked down in a melee outside of the ring, and while the referee is kind of attending to him, Ciampa uses a crutch on Black in order to try and get the win, and that comes to a 2 count. He also manages to hit a draping DDT, but still only gets a 2 count, and after then exposing the concrete, Black manages to hit Black Mass finally on Ciampa, and unfortunately at this point where the concrete has been exposed, the ref kind of takes a bump outside of the ring and lands on that, because Ciampa was going to try and attack Black on the concrete and the ref's kind of having none of it, and then Black fights his way back into the match, and that's when the referee gets knocked down onto the concrete from the apron. So we get the visual 3 count there, or it was a visual about 12 count I think it was, with the crowd all counting along. And this is then when Ciampa uses his opportunity to try and attack with the belt, and this is countered by Johnny Gargano of all people sticking his nose in, kind of comes out of nowhere, and this is kind of the beginning of the end. He manages to stop Ciampa hitting Black with the belt, goes to hit Ciampa himself, but Ciampa blocks it, and kind of in the struggle, as Gargano pulls the belt back to strike Ciampa again, he clocks Black in the head with it. Ciampa then disposes of Gargano, quickly hits a facebuster on Black and pins him 1, 2, 3 to become the 14th different NXT champion. Now, the match itself was brilliant. The crowd absolutely hated the outcome. It was like the one final nail in the coffin for kind of what Ciampa has been doing to the crowd and Gargano. It was that last little piece in the jigsaw puzzle that he needed to turn basically everyone against him. He got the referee to wrap the belt around him, and also raise his hand a couple of times whilst holding the belt as well, just to kind of solidify that I am now the guy. All the while Gargano was laid out at ringside and Black was laid out still in the middle of the ring. And it just goes to show really that this whole time since the beginning of the year, the feud has been Gargano-Ciampa. Obviously the last couple of takeovers, they had been the main event match over the NXT title. Really the only reason the belt was taken off Almas by Black was just to let Almas have a clear route up onto the main roster, which unfortunately hasn't been all that great, although the last few weeks have been pretty damn good. And it's just a shame for Black that he just hasn't had a very good showing as champion, really. He's had one kind of main title defence. I know he defended the belt against Eric Young when Gargano was taken out by Ciampa a few months back, but then he faced Lars Sullivan, and that build was very, very kind of rushed and thrown together, mainly because most of the focus was on Gargano and Ciampa, and Lars Sullivan didn't really feel like he was the right kind of level for an NXT title match. And although it took a couple of black masses to put him down, it was fairly kind of standard. I don't think any of us really expected any other result from that. And it just felt like Black needed a few more decent takeover wins under his belt to really solidify himself as kind of a mainstay champion. Whether this means he will become the third ever two-time NXT champion after Shinsuke Nakamura and Samoa Joe, because he's not been champion for very long, I'm not sure, or whether this kind of diverts the belt over to Gargano and Ciampa and their feud, and Black kind of stays out of the way for the time being. He might even be getting called up potentially after SummerSlam, because the talk is that this will build into a triple threat match at TakeOver Brooklyn, Gargano, Ciampa and Black for the belt. So we're kind of getting Gargano and Ciampa 3, but because Black's in there and he's obviously got legitimate grievances with both guys, then that could kind of lead to Ciampa sneaking a win over either one of them and escaping with the belt, possibly then leading to a Black Gargano feud maybe, with the winner of that becoming the next kind of proper number one contender again. Or it might even just see Black move up to the main roster after SummerSlam, which, although that in of itself is quite good, this has only really been around for about 18 months, it just seems like a bit of a flat ending to his time at NXT level. This is his first singles match defeat. His only other defeat came in that four-way match in, I think it was around October time, to decide the next number one contender, and Gargano actually won that. It might have been later in the year actually, but Gargano won that, so he's only really suffered a couple of defeats, but recently he just doesn't feel like he's been kind of the focus. It's almost like everything is riding on Gargano and Ciampa, and then a bit further down, the Undisputed Era are kind of overseeing the tag and upper mid card area of the booking really, and it's all around those guys, and then obviously Shayna Baszler on the women's side of things. So it's a bit of a shame that his run has ended already. It did end in a very good match under dodgy circumstances, and it adds a nice layer to the Gargano-Ciampa feud, but it just seems a shame that you've kind of used almost this kind of mystique that he had, and this kind of unstoppable aura about him, and that's just kind of been thrown away just to add an extra layer to Gargano-Ciampa. I don't know if that feud really needed that extra element to it. It may have been better kind of removing those two guys from each other for a while completely before bringing them back together later in the year. It would have been quite nice to see Gargano go on a bit of not necessarily a losing streak, but maybe lose his next few matches because of like things like disqualifications or count-outs, where he's just going mad at ringside and kind of losing who he is. That would have been quite a nice character development for him, with Ciampa kind of just watching on and gloating that he's just destroyed everything that Gargano was, and look what I've turned him into, whilst also then potentially racking up some victories himself before maybe facing Black a little bit later in the year. Maybe come sort of Survivor Series time and taking the belt off him there potentially. But there we go. We've got what we've got, and it seems that the rumours are, or I believe it's either rumours or I've seen leaks, that that's where they're going with the title. It's going to be Black taking on Gargano and Ciampa at Brooklyn 4. Which sort of makes sense with how things ended here. As I said, the other main focus was definitely the Undisputed Era, and we will cover them last. Before we get to them, we're just going to kind of encompass everything to do with the women's division. We got the contract signing between Sane and Baszler, with William Regal there just kind of overseeing things, and Baszler brought up the fact that everyone has been saying that this is the Mae Young Classic Finals rematch, which is something I've been mentioning a hell of a lot, and Baszler quite rightly brings up the fact that actually she's already beaten Sane once earlier this year anyway, so this is basically the rubber match. This isn't the rematch from that. She's already moved on and developed to a point where she can beat Sane, and Sane doesn't really, or she doesn't feel that Sane has moved up to the same level that she has, and that she's kind of living off that one and only victory over Baszler to maintain her relevance, and that Baszler has kind of seen off all comers and will probably go on to be victorious, in my opinion. That was kind of the way she was putting herself over in this promo, very kind of strongly, and just kind of breezing over everybody else in the division, making special mention of Candice LeRae, and the fact that she should just be a stay-at-home wife and not get involved in any of this. She should be looking after her husband. That has a few ramifications for later. And Sane just does her weird kind of, you know it, I can beat you, but she does it about 3 times and Baszler's really not interested in it. It was really strangely done, because she wasn't getting any more intense with it. She wasn't making Baszler unnerved by it, because she didn't seem perturbed by what Baszler was saying, which would have made sense if she was just kind of being a bit more kind of ruthless with it and a bit more aggressive with it and a bit more sure of herself. But every time she said it, she seemed to say it with less conviction, so it kind of threw the whole thing off kilter, really. And because of that, it kind of made me think that Baszler's probably going to not necessarily walk through Sane, but probably handily beat her. It's almost like they brought Sane in because they couldn't get Io Shirai last year because of failing her medical, and now it looks like Shirai will be in the second Mae Young Classic, that they've kind of left Kairi Sane by the wayside and have kind of diverted all of their attention behind Baszler and what happens in the Mae Young Classic 2 this year. So that could be interesting. because later on she was confronted by Candice LeRae, who was ready to kind of have a bit of a scuffle, but was taken away by somebody, I'm not sure who it was, and sort of said, this might not be the right time, but when the time comes, you will kind of regret what you've said. So that leads me to think that Baszler will probably keep hold of the belt at Brooklyn 4, and we will probably move into a program with Candice and Baszler, potentially with Candice LeRae winning the belt eventually, or maybe she will just be another kind of high profile name for Baszler to overcome before moving on to the next person in the women's division, who possibly could be Bianca Belair. She had a pretty good interview, sort of saying that she wasn't able to compete in that fatal 4-way as it was originally booked for the number one contender, that Kairi Sane won in the end, because she is currently injured. But because she is undefeated, she shouldn't really have to go through 3 other women just for a shot at Baszler and the belt, because she's basically proven herself already. I should just be given this opportunity because I'm undefeated, and she said that about 20 times, I think. Whether she is injured or not, because it kind of came out of nowhere, or whether they pulled her from that match as injured, in air quotes, to kind of retain her undefeatedness. Because it always felt like we were going towards Baszler and Sane. I've been saying that for quite a few weeks and months now, so maybe that's why she was pulled from that match, just so that she didn't have to suffer a loss, even if she wasn't the one that was pinned. And finally, in the women's division this week, we got a fairly straightforward and kind of an extended squash match. Lacey Evans taking on Tanila Price. Again, utilising her aggression and methodic nature, but not in boring Randy Orton methodic. It was very kind of considered, as I've said numerous times before on this podcast. She has a certain way of working that is quite slow paced, but always in control. It gives her more opportunity to play up to the crowd. She kind of gets in the referee's face because there's a lot of kind of controlling her opponents by pulling her hair or holding her in the ropes, and really utilising the referee's 5 count at every single opportunity. But every now and then a few nice kind of high spot type moves. The only thing we didn't really see in this match was the moonsault that she always misses, although she did hit... I think it was a kind of a back... She sort of came up from a seated position, elevated herself up and kind of did a backflip round, although she was always in contact with the floor. It's kind of difficult to explain. If you've seen the match, you'll know exactly the bit I'm talking about, because Price is able to get her knees up. This is kind of the one and only hope spot she manages to get in to try and get back in control. Attempts to hit kind of a running springboard elbow or something of that nature on Lacey Evans in the corner, and is struck with the right hand, the woman's right, and is laid out 1, 2, 3. So that finish is definitely being very well protected. Whenever she has lost in recent matches, she just hasn't used that move at all, which is a very good way of protecting that move, even more than protecting the performer themselves. It would be a good idea, probably she could have done it in this match, actually hit that moonsault and sort of actually successfully hit it, rather than just use it and have the opponent roll out the way, because I think she needs to successfully hit that move a few times so that we actually believe come a big sort of time match that she could hit that move and maybe win off of it, because every time we've seen it, the opponent has rolled out the way and she's just eaten the canvas. So maybe it would be a good idea to start utilising that as not even necessarily a finish, but a move that she actually successfully hits, and maybe then uses that to work into the finish if she doesn't pin off of it. She doesn't necessarily have to pin off of it because we haven't actually seen her successfully hit it, so maybe she wants to keep the match going potentially, or we could even see kickouts from it, who knows. So yes, she is definitely kind of being built up within the kind of the mid card of the women's division. It's kind of her alongside Baszler are the ones that are racking up the wins and kind of being seen as the threats. And Belair, I suppose. It's all about the heels in the women's division at the moment. So yes, that was kind of the women's division as a whole. I don't see Lacey Evans working her way into the title picture yet. I think she needs to have a few kind of high profile takeover matches potentially that aren't title matches, which I know is difficult because there's usually only 5 matches and now you've got 4 belts, so there are 4 of your matches, and then you've only really got 1 left over, and it's usually for kind of a number 1 contendership for a men's title or some kind of blood feud. So it's not completely beyond the realms of possibility that they could work in a second women's match there, and I certainly don't think that they shouldn't be doing that. Why not have two or 3 of them in there? There's no reason not to. Maybe there's a chance when especially with the belts being on the Undisputed Era, where the tag belts and the North American title aren't defended because they're in a 6-man match, and that kind of then frees up another kind of a grudge match on the card potentially, who knows, because I think she needs to work that in a few more times before moving on to kind of title contention. And obviously with her being a heel, Baszler being a heel, that's not really likely to happen anytime soon anyway. So she's got plenty of time to get a couple of high profile wins, ideally at a takeover show, before she moves up to that kind of proper top tier level. Probably, again, this will come after WrestleMania weekend, when a few of these top level women, probably Baszler, possibly Candice LeRae by that point. I know she hasn't been around for very long in NXT, but obviously she's been around for a very long time. Nikki Cross, if she's still around. Those kind of people need to move up to the main roster, I think, after WrestleMania, for this opportunity to kind of find Lacey Evans, if you like. So finally, the Undisputed Era. Adam Cole had a match against Sean Maluta, who apparently was in the Cruiserweight Classic. Fairly one-sided. Maluta got a few bits and pieces in early, but once Cole was properly in control of the match, once he kind of let his bravado dissipate and realised that he needed to kind of get down to business, he managed to put away Maluta fairly easily with a super kick as Maluta was coming off of the middle ropes, and then he hit the last shot to the back of his head and won. This kind of then transitioned straight into a promo with him saying that he kind of gives opportunity to everyone. He defends his belt all around the world. He gives opportunities to people like this jumped up kid here for kind of a high profile match for him anyway, against the likes of Adam Cole, because he's that superior. And this causes Ricochet to come out, who basically counters everything with, well, you've hardly defended that belt at all, you keep running away from challenges, prove to me that you are not a coward and face me at Brooklyn for the North American title. And it looks like he's going to kind of rile Adam Cole up to the point where he goes, you know what, yeah, sure, whatever, me and you for the belt. But Adam Cole kind of obviously sees round this and goes, look, I don't need to lower myself down to your level. I know I'm better than you, so let's just leave it at that. He goes to leave, He gets called a coward a couple of times, which riles him up again, making it seem like this time he is finally going to say, yeah, you're on, let's do it. But that's when Roderick Strong and Kyle O'Reilly come out. And then, obviously, with the added support of those two, the bravado comes back in, and that is when the War Raiders make their entrance and kind of even the numbers. So we think, oh, maybe we're going to see a bit of a 3-on-3 brawl here. The War Raiders kind of send them packing slightly, and just as the Undisputed Era think they're leaving one way, out come Tyler Bate and Trent Seven, and that kind of sends them running the other way after a little bit of a scuffle, and they manage to kind of just about leave with their tail definitely between their legs. So you've got Ricochet definitely got his sights set on the NXT North American title. War Raiders are eyeing up the tag belts, but obviously Bate and Seven have got their rematch clause for the belts that they lost the other week when Tyler Bate threw in the towel. And again, because of blooming spoilers and rumours and things like that, because of this all being pre-taped, it's supposedly is going to be Bate and Seven taking on the Undisputed Era for the belts at Brooklyn for kind of their rematch. Whether this will become a triple threat tag match with the War Raiders in there as well, or whether War Raiders kind of put their marker in after Brooklyn and say, look, whoever wins, then we're the challenge afterwards. I guess that kind of makes sense. It is a shame that they kind of hot potatoed the tag belts onto Bate and Seven and then off of them straight away after. I kind of understand why they did it in the Royal Albert Hall, but again, we all knew about it before we got a chance to see it, so it was only really good for the people who were live in attendance. But because of that, obviously you then have to have your blooming rematches and stuff, and if that then takes the War Raiders out of contention for the tag belts, then I think that's a bit of a shame, to be honest. Because it seemed like they were the next logical team. Now, obviously, they're not, because Moustache Mountain need their rematch, and I guess they've got a couple of weeks in which to have that match before Brooklyn. Maybe they do, and then that's when the War Raiders can come in and face at TakeOver. But I kind of see that being more... give them an opportunity at TakeOver. Obviously, they put on a brilliant match on NXT a couple of weeks ago, so give them the extra kind of time and bigger stage to do it at TakeOver. Also, it's about time Bate was able to perform on the TakeOver show again, because it's been over a year since he's been able to, when he lost the UK title to Pete Dunne, and I don't believe Seven ever has, so give them that opportunity. Even if they don't win, at least give them that stage, like they did with Lorcan and Birch at the last TakeOver show. But definitely going forward, War Raiders are going to be the team to beat, I think, or War Machine, as Mauro nearly called them and kind of stopped himself. That was quite a nice little moment. So yes, that was this week's NXT in a nutshell, really. An excellent match by Ciampa and Black. It was given enough time to breathe. They worked each other really, really well. There was a nice kind of ending with Gargano coming in and kind of inserting himself and giving Black real significant grievance with him as well, so that he works into the three-way coming into Brooklyn in a sort of logical and sensible way. It puts the belt on somebody that the crowd absolutely detests, so expect him to come out next week gloating for all to see. Again, Undisputed Era clearly are Triple H's favourites at the moment. It's all about them, and they will probably escape Brooklyn with all of the gold, seeing as it's going to be the anniversary of their arrival. So that will be probably quite significant to give them that victory a year on. Interesting that we still haven't seen Keith Lee, whether he will make an appearance next week or the week after. I doubt he will make an appearance at TakeOver. He will probably show up on NXT tapings before then, and then kind of do his the kind of the usual squash matches initially. Next week we've got EC3 taking on Kona Reeves, and I believe that's going to work into a program with Velveteen Dream. So as far as all the rumours and bits and pieces are, we've nearly got our entire card for Brooklyn already. So when we get to the extra bit of this podcast, for anyone listening on Podbean, I'm going to have to discuss something else as well in order to kind of fatten that section out, so stay tuned for that. And yeah, the women's stuff, a bit below par, but I can understand why they needed to give enough time to Ciampa and Black, and two kind of insignificant matches beforehand where they did their job, shall we say. All the bits did their job, so we can move on next week to building towards TakeOver a bit more, and probably hear from our new champion. Oh, great. So yes, that was all things NXT this week. Thank you for listening. I have been That British Guy. You can find me on Twitter at Rightly Wrongly, and on Facebook at That British Guy 86. Also, of course, if you're listening to this on Podbean, you can also find me on YouTube at That British Guy. I will be back next week with the NXT talk, but until then, I've been That British Guy, and I will see you very soon. Goodbye.